Okay, got it. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our first ever AAPI Folklore panel. I am your co-host, Juliana. I'm a landscape architect with Public Works, and I am joined by my colleagues, Jamie Lee and Enju Cho, both architects with the Bureau of Architecture. Welcome to our folklore panel. And for this event, we really wanted to show people the diversity of the different cultures, ethnicities, and regions of the AAPI people through folklore. And we're very excited and lucky to be joined by our wonderful panelists who are all accomplished artists in the worlds of film, literature, writing, academia. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm very happy to introduce our folklore panelists. Thank you so much to our panelists today. We have Matthew Abaya, Film and Studio Production Manager at Stanford University, Dr. Yu-Sun Crystal Chung, Freelance Translator, Cam Nguyen, Lecturer at UC Berkeley Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies, Jvala Singh, Lecturer at UC Berkeley Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies, and we have Dr. Juliana Wijaya, Indonesian Studies Program Coordinator at UCLA Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Welcome and thank you. Now I will hand it off to Jamie to present our first panelist. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Julie. Matthew Abaya is a writer, director, visual effects artist, and DJ with a passion for exploring themes of race and identity through horror and sci-fi. His first feature film, Vampiraya, featuring the Filipino vampire Aswang, has earned critical acclaim at festivals around the world. When he's not producing video coursework at Stanford University, Matthew shares his film and DJing adventures on YouTube and Twitch. Thank you so much for joining us, Matthew. Take it off.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, I'm going to tell you to advance to the next slide over here. Here we go. So actually, I just want to take a second to say that folklore is our culture. I really appreciate the opportunity to share our cultural experiences and our folklore with everybody, because through my experience as a Filipino American mixed race, it gives us a chance to not only understand our culture, but also share it. Go ahead and move on to the next. And yeah, as she was saying, I'm known for doing this movie called Vampiraya, which features a Filipino vampire called an Aswang. Go ahead and move on to the next. And you can watch it on Tubi TV for free. So maybe after this panel, you can go ahead and watch it. Go ahead and move on to the next. So let's dive in deep to what it is. What is an Aswang, or also pronounced as a manananggal? Try saying that a few times really fast. Manananggal. Go ahead, next slide. So an Aswang is a self-segmenting vampire. It separates at its torso, as you can see in the photo here. It sprouts these bat-like wings, and it has a long tendril tongue to pierce and suck out the blood and viscera of victims. Also known for feeding on the unborn of pregnant women. And if you want to stop one of these, what happens is it's not like a typical vampire where you have to put a stake through its heart or something. You have to find the lower half of the body, it kind of hides it somewhere. And you got to pour salt and vinegar down the lower half. What basically happens is it won't be able to reattach. And when the sun comes up, it's going to burn in the sun. So yeah, it still can burn up in the sun. But by daytime, she's usually seen as like a beautiful woman. And this is actually one of the main characters of Vampiraya is based on. And her name is Bampinay. Go ahead and move on to the next. And this actually is kind of a complicated story because it's, usually they're depicted as women. And we're looking at spiritually empowered people, women, a group of women called the Babaylan, which was like the leaders of our community. When the patriarchy of the Spanish colonization came in, basically they kind of demonized the women and used our own folklore kind of against it and say, those women, those women who are strong, empowered, and tell you all this stuff about our spirit and everything, they're the evil ones. They turn into monsters at night. So we kind of learned how to fear these women, and which was, kind kind of I think is really damaging to our culture. So go ahead and go on to the next one. Okay, so we have so we say once revered, now they're feared. Basically, it's like this was basically our spiritually empowered women were now monsters. And this is often used to like frighten people and young children. So during political times, people could actually use people's superstition to persuade people. It's even been used in propagandas during World War II to influence some of the rebellions. And young children, this is where it gets interesting. If you're caught being bad, basically, you might have the elder say, the aswang is going to get you. So it's often used as a very manipulative thing. Go ahead, next. And I'm going to share some images from my movie real quick. You can kind of scroll through these really quickly. So you have some behind the scenes photos because it was a really difficult challenge. When you have a creature that splits off in half and sprouts bat-like wings, it was a lot of work to do it. So we have our actress, Aureen Almario, who's also a professor in Asian American Studies. And she had to wear green pants to hide her legs and make her into this half-bodied creature, and which she did an amazing job. Keep on going. Let's see. Yes, and then we got some computer animation, some practical work, some digital scanning, so stuff. So it was a really elaborate work that we had to do to create this monster. You just keep scrolling through. Just want to give you guys a taste of it all. And the very end, oh yeah, we have some more stuff here. I know we have a lot of slides. And I actually have a trading card too. We actually came up with a bunch of trading cards for the film, which you'll see in later pictures. I'm usually used to pushing through these ones really quickly. There it is. There's a trading card right there. So this is one of one of the hallmarks of our film. We try to make it more like actiony and fun to watch, which you're going to see a trailer for in just a few minutes. Keep going. And before I play the trailer, I just want to make sure you guys know about some other things you can read about. You can read the comic books Trece and Stone, and we have Maximo Ramos has some popular work on Aswang Complex. One of my favorite academic reads is at the bottom by Jimenez, which is an exploration in Philippine folklore, which dives deeper into like how colonization influenced the Aswang mythology. And so go ahead, go ahead, take away the trailer there. And salamat, everybody. Thank you for your time. Hope you guys enjoy the movie. And check it out on Tubi.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. That looks like a really fun movie, and I'm very curious to watch it. Clinton, I will hand it to you to share the trailer.
It's a little scary, so if you guys are a little squeamish, just let me know. I mean, you could kind of do this.
Sorry, Clinton, I think this may be a different video. I think it's the one right below it. Vampire movie trailer. Matt, we cannot hear you.
I had killed my mic. So
no
go ahead and go to the one on the top. There's one that says trailer on the top of that playlist. There you go.
The hunters.
This is it.
Here we go.
We aren't just limited to hunting vampires, but all creatures of the night. We call them the undead.
Can you maximize the full screen?
I see your favorite color is black. Are you like all into vampires or something?
Something like that.
Are you gonna drink my blood?
That and more. poison all your toys.
This is for Mahal.
Let's end this.
As long as the undead are kept away from the human world, balance is maintained.
Great. Thank you, Matt, for sharing. Thank you, Clinton. So now we will move on to our next panelist, and I will hand it over to Unju.
All right, could you share your slide?
Yes,
Julie?
of course.
All right, I would like to introduce our next panel and my dear friend. Dr. Chung is a freelance translator from Seoul, South Korea, now living in the South Bay. She received her doctor's degree in history and women's studies from the University of Michigan. After writing a dissertation on friendship, she left academia in search of friendlier circumstances. She has since worked on a wide gamut of projects, including everything from academic articles to short fiction. Yusun is going to present the story back from Korea. Take away, Yusun.
So, once there lived a very rich family. They had an only child, a boy who loved to have stories told to him. Whenever he met someone, he would say, "Tell me a new story." And every time he would store the story he heard in a small bag he carried on his belt. He collected so many stories that soon the bag was packed tight, and he had to push hard to fit each new story in. Then, to make sure that none of the stories escaped, he kept the bag tightly tied at the mouth. The boy eventually grew into a handsome young man, and the time came for him to get married. A bride was chosen for him, and the household was in an uproar to prepare for her arrival. Now, there happened to be a faithful old servant in this household who had been with the family ever since the boy was young. While everyone was preparing for the young master's wedding, this servant was tending a fire on the kitchen hearth. Next slide, please. Suddenly, he became aware of faint whispering sounds coming from somewhere. Upon further investigation, he discovered that the voices were coming from a bag hanging on the wall. It was the bag of stories from the young master's childhood. Now it hung forgotten on an old nail on the kitchen wall. The old servant listened carefully. "Listen, everyone," said a voice. "The boy's wedding takes place tomorrow. He's kept us stuffed in this bag for so long. We must make him pay for this." "Yes," said another voice, "I agree. Tomorrow he will leave by horse to bring home his bride. I shall transform into bright red berries ripening by the roadside. There I shall wait for him. I'll look so beautiful he'll want to eat me, but I'll be poisonous and he'll die if he does." "And if he doesn't die from the berries," a third voice piped up, "I shall become a clear bubbling spring by the roadside. There will be a beautiful gourd dipper floating, and when he sees me, he'll feel thirsty and drink. When he does, I'll make him suffer terribly." A fourth voice joined in. "If you fail, then I'll become an iron skewer, heated red hot, hiding in the bag of chaff by his horse for him to dismount on. And when he steps on me, I'll burn him badly." Because the custom of the land in those days was that a bag of chaff be placed by the bridegroom's horse so that he wouldn't have to step directly on the ground. Then a fifth voice whispered, "If that fails, I'll become those poisonous string snakes and hide in the bridal chamber. When the bride and groom go to sleep, I'll bite them." Alarmed, the servant was determined to go with the young master himself. Next slide, please. Early next morning, the wedding procession was ready to set forth. As the groom mounted his horse, the faithful servant came running out and grabbed the horse's bridle, asking to be allowed to lead the horse. "You have other work to do," the old master of the house said, but the servant would not be dissuaded. Finally, the procession was on its way. First, they came upon an open field with bright berries growing by the roadside. The bridegroom called out, "Stop the horse and pick me some of those berries." But the servant wouldn't stop, instead hurrying the horse along. After a while, they came to a bubbling spring. Next slide, please. The bridegroom attempted to stop and asked for some water, but again, the servant prodded the horse and hurried by. The groom grumbled, but the servant took no notice. Soon they reached the bride's home. A large crowd was gathered in the yard, and the servant led the horse into the compound and stopped it beside the waiting bag of chaff. As the groom dismounted, however, the servant pretended to stumble and shoved him aside. The bridegroom fell and was embarrassed by his clumsiness, but he couldn't scold the servant in front of everyone, so he kept silent and entered the bride's home. The wedding ceremony was held without incident, and the newly married couple returned to the groom's home. Night fell, and the couple retired to their room. The faithful servant armed himself with a sword and hid right outside the bridal chamber. As soon as the lights went out, the servant burst into the room. Next slide, please. "Who's there?" the astonished couple shouted, jumping out of bed. "Young master," the servant said, "I'll explain later. Right now, make haste and get out of the way." He kicked the bedding aside and lifted the mattress. There, hundreds of string snakes were coiled in a single slithering ball. The servant slashed at the snakes, whirling here and there until every one of them was dead. Then he let out a sigh of relief and told the whole story, recounting the whispers he heard coming from the old bag on the kitchen wall. Next slide, please. That is why when stories are heard, they must not be stored away to become mean and spiteful, but must always be shared with others. That way, they pass from one person to another so that as many people as possible can enjoy them. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Chung. That was a very interesting story. And I will pass it on to Jamie. Back to Jamie.
Thank you. And our next panelist is Nguyệt Kam. Nguyệt Kam attended Hanoi National University with a degree in English language and literature. She earned an MA from UC Berkeley with a thesis on the history of spy fiction in southern Vietnam. She has taught Vietnamese literature at UC Berkeley for almost 2 decades. Among her literary translations are Charlotte's Web, Trumpet of the Swan, the novel Dumb Luck, and her own book, a collection of Vietnamese folktale called Two Cakes Fit for a King, which she'll talk about right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everybody. The story I'm going to tell is Two Cakes Fit for a King. A long time ago, the Hùng King reigned in the kingdom of Viet. The 6th Hùng King had many sons. His 18th son, Tiết Liêu, was the most gentle and down to earth. Tiết Liêu lived a simple life in the countryside, finding pleasure in planting rice and raising animals. One day, the king summoned all of his sons to the palace and said, "I'm growing old. The time had come for me to choose an heir. I have decided to hold a contest. A month from today, whichever one of you bring me the most meaningful, the newest, and the most delicious food will inherit the throne." While the other prince raced far from the palace to search for expensive and exotic dishes, Tiết Liêu returned to his village, trying to come up with a food that could express his love for his parents and also his love for his homeland. That night, an immortal appeared to Tiết Liêu and said, "Nothing is more important than rice. Nothing is more precious than the life granted by one's parents. You should make something out of rice to express your love and gratitude to your parents." After giving some thought to the immortal advice, Tiết Liêu decided that he would make two kinds of cakes, a square green one and a round white one. He prepared rice, mung bean, pork, green onion, and salt to make the square cake, and then wrap it in green leaves. He made pure rice. He grounded pure rice to make a round cake. On the day of the competition, the other prince's tray were beautifully presented with all sorts of extravagant food shaped like dragons and phoenixes. But when the Hung King approached Tiết Lieu's tray, he was surprised to see only two kinds of plain-looking cakes. Tiết Lieu explained to his father, "The square cake symbolizes the earth. Inside, rice and salt represent the most important ingredient in our daily consumption. Mung bean, onion, and pork embody all the plants and creatures on earth. For me," Tiết Lieu said, "the earth represents the mother, nurturing and caring. The round white cake symbolizes the sky. For me, the sky represents the father, protective and noble." So Hung King was very pleased. Upon trying the two cakes, he found both were fragrant, fresh, and delicious. He named the two cakes Bánh Chưng and Bánh Dày. Tiết Lieu won the competition and became the seventh Hung King, called Lang Lieu. Since then, the square Chung cake and the round Dày cake have become the traditional Vietnamese dishes that people make to offer to their ancestors on the Lunar New Year. Every year, people will stay up all night, tending to the fire, cooking cake, chatting, singing, playing game, and telling children the origin of the two cakes. So this story, there are three noteworthy points. The first one is the story reflects a Vietnamese belief from a pre-modern time that the earth is square and the sky is round. The second point is the story reflects a time in history of Vietnam during which ascending to the throne was based purely on one's own merit and not on one's order of birth. And the third point is the story marked the beginning of Vietnamese tradition of ancestor worship instead of animistic worship. That's a story, and now I'm going to, so this illustration, as you can see, is the cover page of our book, Two Cake Fit for a King, Folktales from Vietnam. It's a book of Vietnamese folktale compiled by myself and Dana Sachs. All of the illustration is done by an artist from Hanoi named Bùi Hoài Mai. Next slide, please. This is for one painting from a collection called Lunar New Year in Homeland, drawn in 2021 by an artist in the north of Vietnam, a very young artist named Trần Nguyên. As you can see on the painting, this is the old way people would make the Chung cake and the Dày cake and cook it all night long for Lunar New Year. And this is a way to kind of longing for a traditional way of life. Next, please. And this is from a website that provides sample picture for children to, to do their own drawing, own painting to celebrate Lunar New Year. Next, please. And this is, so every year, the Vietnamese have annual commemoration of the Hung Kings. And during the commemoration, they have many kind of celebration, many kind of parades, and among which is the competition to make Chung cake and Zai cake. And so this photo is one group trying to compete and make the square cake. Next, please. And this is another group is competing to make Zai cake. And as you can see, the Chung cake represent, the square cake represent the mother. So the woman were making it, and the round white cake represent the father. So you can see the group around it are mainly men. And both of these competitions were just last month, April 2023. Next, please. This is a collection called Lunar New Year in the Past and Lunar New Year Today by a media group called Black Moon in 2015 that went viral in Vietnam. As you can see on the upper part is how you make the Chung cake in the old day. The entire family, 3 generations, the grandparents, the parents, the children all gather and make it. But in the in modern day, especially in urban, in cities, people are so busy, so a lot of family couldn't do that, and so they go and buy it at store. And the this kind of collection is basically another kind of longing for the past, the old day when people had more time for one another. Next, please. This is a typical altar of a Vietnamese family during Lunar New Year. As you can see, the cake very prominent on the altar. Next, please. And this is just to show you how important the 2 cakes that I told you. So this is the National Assembly House. This is the most important building in Vietnam. This is where all of the lawmakers gather and discuss the most important decision for the country. And it's like Congress in the US. And you can see they start to build this building in 2009, finished in 2014. And the building is shaped like the square cake. And then on the top it is the round cake. And they intentionally make it this way to celebrate the tradition. And finally, I want to show a very short way of presenting the exactly story of the Chung cake and Zai cake that I just told you, but it's much more exciting than the way I present it. So yeah, please.
Thank you, Cam. Clinton, do you have the video? Thank you.
Yeah, it's me, Ali. Yo. Đời hùng vương thứ 6 có chàng lang liêu con trai vua, vốn từ nhỏ thật thà chất phác, chẳng quan tâm so đo hơn thua. Đến một ngày vua cha già yếu, ông bèn nghĩ đến việc truyền ngôi, nhưng lại có quá nhiều hoàng tử, việc phân vân cũng khó tránh khỏi. Âm thức chàng.
Yeah, that's how the story is told in Vietnam today.
Thank you, Cam. It was so nice to hear the story and the different customs of Vietnam too. So let me start sharing my screen again.
All right. Our next panelist is Jvala Singh. Jvala Singh joins UC Berkeley as a lecturer for Punjabi while completing his PhD at the University of British Columbia, where he's examining pre-colonial Sikh historical narratives. This examination explores literature in Punjabi and Braj from the 18th and 19th centuries, building off from his previous Master of Arts research completed at the University of Toronto, where he focused on Sikh Braj versions of Sanskrit epics such as Ramayana. In furthering accessibility of pre-colonial Sikh Braj texts, Jvala Singh runs a podcast the Jura's podcast, where each episode is a chapter summary in English of the voluminous Suraj Prakash, a historical narrative covering the lives of the 10 Sikh gurus. Jvala is going to present here Ranja from Punjab region of India. Take it away.
Thanks so much. So hi, everybody. First, thanks for including me in this great panel today. Today, I'll be speaking about one of the most famous Punjabi folk tales passed down through generations in the Punjab region for centuries. It's a story about love, jealousy, sacrifice, and the power of social norms. So the story is called Heer Ranja. One of the earliest accounts of the text was from the 16th century, but like all good stories, there were sequels, different renditions, variations, all sorts of spin-offs. Naturally, it's been interpreted also in many different ways, but I'll just be presenting one popular way of telling the story. So if we could change the slide. So the story is situated in rural Punjab. So here we can see a map. Punjab is the northwestern region of India and also the east side of Pakistan. The region got split into two during the 1947 partition. The story revolves around the love between Heer, the daughter of a wealthy landlord, and Ranja, a handsome, talented young man who comes from a poor family. Heer, from a young age, is promised to another man, as was the custom of that time. But during their youth, she falls in love with Ranja, who at the time was this poor, wandering shepherd. Heer is this powerful young woman who commands respect from all those around her, which also makes her a target of much jealousy from her family members, most notably her sister-in-law. So Heer, as a commanding and beautiful young woman, falls in love with the wandering flute player, Ranja, who many months ago was kicked out of his house and forced to roam around to look for work. So Ranja was the youngest of 4 brothers, but he was his father's favorite. And that made many of the other brothers jealous. Ranja wasn't made to tend to the land like his brothers. He lived his days out in comfort, just roaming around, playing the flute in the forest. This really pissed off his brothers. So when the father passed away, the brothers kicked out Ranja from the house. They didn't give him any inheritance, no right to any of the land, and they forced him to fend for himself. So Ranja's world of pain, wandering, looking for work, flipped when he met the love of his life, Heer. We can change the slide. Thanks. So Ranja took up the job of being a shepherd in Heer's village, just as a means to provide and kind of hang around. And as the story moves along, Heer's family becomes aware of what's happening, the relationship that's developing. They then endeavor to put an end to that relationship. The family turns to the local priest for some guidance, who scolds Heer for this dishonorable action. But Heer rebuts the priest with a touching sermon about love, which didn't penetrate the stone heart of the priest. Heer's father, on the other hand, is more outraged from the fact that Ranja is from a lower class, seeing it not as an appropriate fit. So he forbids her from seeing Ranja and promises to marry her off to whom she was initially promised to. So Heer and Ranja, though they refuse this, they refuse to give up on their love, and they run away together to build a better life. But their happiness is short-lived, and they are eventually captured and then brought back to the village. So Heer's family decides to punish Ranja by forcing him to leave the village forever. And distraught from this turn of events, Ranja then becomes a renunciate, a wandering ascetic. He takes initiation from a yogic order, and he just roams around place to place in this great state of depression. Heer is devastated by the loss of her love and agrees to marry the man who she was initially set up with. After the marriage, he moves to the village of her new husband. Eventually, though, Ranja, who's just roaming around place to place, he turns up in that same village that Heer moved to. Both of them are delighted and run away together back to Heer's hometown, actually. The family deceptively agrees now to their love, agrees to marry them together, but the sister-in-law ends up poisoning Heer on the wedding day with Ranja. Ranja hears about this. He runs to Heer. He recognizes that she had eaten something poisoned. And in that state of heartbroken sadness, he also consumes the poisoned food so he could unite with Hir in the afterlife. And the story of Hir and Ranja is a tragic tale of two lovers who were unable to be together because of societal norms and expectations. It speaks to the power of love, but also to the limitations of societal structures. In Sufi, Islamic, and Sikh traditions, this idea about love, how temporal love, love with family members, with your partner, your community, can be so overwhelming that it actually transcends into a divine love, a love integrated with the creation, the entire world. And that is the underlying theme of the story. It's called Ishq Majaji is the temporal love, and then Ishq Hakiki is that transcendental love. So this love that burns so intensely, it also has the power to extinguish quickly as well. This is both used as a metaphor of union with a beloved, which dissolves the sense of self, but also in the form of tragedy, like in the narrative structure of this folktale. So can we change the slide? There are several important philosophical points that we can take away from the story. Again, it highlights the importance of individual agency. Both Hir and Ranja choose to follow their hearts, rebelling against societal and religious norms, along with the expectations of their families. This can be seen as a reminder that we must always make our own choices, even when they are difficult. Secondly, the story of Hir Ranja has also been understood as a critique of societal norms and structures, the rigid social hierarchy. It speaks about the class and caste divisions in Punjab that prevented Hir and Ranja from being together and ultimately forced their tragic end. So this can be seen as a reminder that we must always be aware of our limitations of our own societal structures and work to challenge them when they prevent us from living fulfilling lives. So lastly, the story speaks to the power of love and the lengths that people will go to be with the ones that they love. Hir and Ranja's love was so strong that they're willing to risk everything, break societal norms, take a stand for what they feel what was right, which was for them to be together. A powerful reminder of the force and strength that love provides. So I hope that this story serves as a reminder to us all that, to follow our hearts, to challenge societal norms, structures, when they prevent us from living our best selves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jvala, for sharing such a beautiful story and for your insights as well. And so now I would like to turn it back to Jamie to present our next panelist.
Thank you. Our last panelist is Dr. Juliana Wijaya. She teaches Indonesian at the UCLA Department of Asian Studies and Cultures and is currently the Indonesian Studies Program Coordinator at the UCLA Center for Southeast Asian Studies. She received her PhD in Applied Linguistics from UCLA and has researched and published in the fields of Second and Heritage Language Pedagogy and Acquisition, Discourse Analysis, Pragmatics, and Corpus Linguistics. She was also the president of the Council of Teachers of Southeast Asian Languages from 2017 till this year. Dr. Wijaya will be presenting the story of Malin, Kundang from West Sumatra, Indonesia. Take it off, Doctor.
Thank you, Jamie, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to share a folktale from my country, Indonesia. So Malin Kundang is a well-known folktale from West Sumatra, Indonesia. His name is a familiar cultural reference in Indonesia. It's a reference to an unfilial child. Indonesian parents still widely refer to his name or cite this folktale to their children if they misbehave or being disrespectful to their parents. So don't act like Malin Kundang. That's what upset parents would say. Regardless of where people are from in Indonesia, they will all be familiar with this story. Next slide, please. So here's where West Sumatra is. This northwest is part of Indonesia. And so Padang is where this story is from. Okay. And next, please. So Padang is very famous for this food, and beef rendang is one that is pretty popular and actually across the world. And there's a one dedicated song for this food. Next, please. So I will start with the story. So there's quite a few versions of the stories, and here's one of them. Long ago, there lived a boy named Malin Kundang. He lived with his mother in a fishing village on a beach near Padang. His mother loved him very much. However, they both lived in poverty. His father had been away for a long time and never returned. Next, please. As a teenager, Malin dreamed of venturing out of the village in hopes of finding a better life. Next. One day, Malin saw a merchant vessel that was anchored in the beach pier. He saw this as an opportunity and begged his mother to let him go to the city. However, his mother was reluctant as she feared of anything bad that might happen to him. Eventually, she agreed and told him to remember her and returned to the village. Several years had passed, and Malin's mother never heard from him. However, he always anticipated his arrival and waited at the pier every day. Next, please. Malin worked very hard and eventually became a rich merchant himself. He later married a rich merchant's daughter, and in some version, the merchant is he actually worked for this merchant and became very successful, and then later he married the daughter. The merchant owned many large ships, and Malin and his wife often traveled on the ships for business. Next, please. One day, his big and luxurious ship arrived at the pier of the beach in his village. The villagers gathered in the pier, curious to see who the couple might be. A man and a woman dressed in extravagant clothes disembarked from the ship. Next, please. Seeing that it was her long-lost son, Malin's mother immediately ran to embrace him. Next, please. Instead of accepting her embrace, Malin pushed her to the ground. He felt ashamed of his mother's ragged and scruffy clothes. Next, please. So, fearful that of what his wife might think, he refused to acknowledge her as his mother. Then the couple went back to the ship and sailed away. Okay. The heartbroken mother prayed for the man's actions to be forgiven if he was not her son, and prayed for God's justice if he was. Next, please. Shortly after, the weather shifted drastically, and a storm struck Malin's ship, destroying it. The wreckage of the ship was scattered throughout the beach the morning after. Next, please. Okay. Amidst the pieces of the ship laid a human shaped boulder that was believed to be Malin Kundang in a kneeling position. He was cursed and turned into a stone as a result of his horrible behavior, denying his mother. So actually he was in the position because he was realizing what was happening to him. He was asking for forgiveness, but it was too late. Okay, so this is not a you can find this stone carved by two artists or sculptors on Air Manis Padang Beach, and the small island called Pisang Island. Okay, terima kasih, thank you, and I'll put the links here if you are interested in this folk tales, and it has an English. It was narrated in English as well. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Wijaya, for sharing the story with us. That concludes our panelists, our wonderful panelists, and I want to again give them a huge thank you for sharing all these diverse stories. We learned a little bit about some different cultures, and it was a mix of different kinds of stories, and that was a lot of fun, and that was very interesting. Definitely learned a lot, and I hope the audience also enjoyed it as well. Now I'd like to open it up to questions, since we have some time, questions from the audience. And I believe that there are some questions in the chat.
Yes, we have a couple questions. One that's already been answered, but I'll let Jvala speak towards that. So Don had a question for Jvala about why he picked the 2 centuries for his doctoral stories. I believe it was the 18th and 19th centuries. And he commented it was a great story in an Indian, a Punjabi Indian variation on Romeo and Juliet, like many other similar stories. And Jvala, would you like to speak towards your response?
Yeah, sure. I'll just expand on what I had written there, just in regard to the situation in Punjab during that time, during the mid-19th centuries, when the British then take control, they kind of take over Punjab. So what we see happening is a stark kind of difference in how histories are being told later on as a result of that colonial influence. So I was really interested in what was happening just before the British come in. Like, how were people telling stories there? How do the narrative structures work? What were people focused on? So that's kind of why I'm focusing on those stories. But I'm happy to, if there's any back and forth. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. And we also have another question from Ben. Many of these stories are probably hundreds, if not thousands of years old, with different variations and adaptations across the years. And as our lives and political and historical realities have changed, how have these stories changed or evolved? And do the changes in these stories correspond with the overall societal changes that you've seen in your respective cultures? This is, I guess, a question for all of our panelists. So whoever wants to jump in on that one.
You know, when I was starting off learning about the Aswang, I mean, I was just interested in vampires, and I was starting to realize we have our own variation of it. But at the further I kind of looked back onto it, I realized how much of it was influenced by just colonial influence. And we had something that probably existed before, kind of like the Babaylan have been there and always been there, and they're still around. It's just that it's been changed over time. And I'm still, as many Filipinos are, still trying to learn a lot about that right now. There's a lot of looking back to figure out what were we pre-Hispanic times? What was that? And some people are even arguing to ourselves, should we even be called Filipinos, because that's named after King Felipe of Spain. So there is so much that we're still just learning about ourselves. So this was just sort of, for me personally, an entry point to understand where we actually came from, what existed prior.
If I may, I think for Malin Kundang, the story remains the same because it's more, like a teaching or referring to the relationship with the parents and the children, and how children have to respect their parents. Unlike, what Matt has presented, like there's colonial stories or colonialism behind probably this story, so it may change or not. Okay, but for this it remains the same. And then actually this folktale is popular. It's not only in Indonesia but also Brunei, Darussalam, Malaysia, but they have different names and a bit different. The stories are rather different. So it's called Sweet Skipper in Brunei Darussalam, the name of the, and the meaning, the story changed, not changed, but it's a bit different from the one from Indonesia. But the moral of the story remains the same, that as children have to respect their parents, have to be obedient, and if not, they are like this unfilial child that is cursed. So you should be respectful to your parents, otherwise you'll experience bad things in your life. That's the message.
In the case of the story bag, I think it's a story that speaks to the universal power of stories, which was why I thought it was an appropriate story to share at this particular panel. And at the same time, I think as a historical artifact, it refers to a point where print culture was overtaking oral storytelling culture. And so that's like the specific historical background of that story.
Yeah. To the question, yes, there are. I don't think there are significant change in the way the story is told throughout different century. The first written record of this story was in 15th century. So in the last, more than 5 centuries, it had not changed the basic structure. That being said, because it's oral tradition, so the story always changed each time it was told, by different parents. Even in our book, the story was told with added figure. The prince has a wife who's play an important role, and etc. etc. But there was an interesting theory of a historian, of a late historian, who said that in the old day, before the 15th century, the Vietnamese also celebrate New Year with the 2 kind of cake, but not a square one. It's a round shaped one, white one, and a kind of cylinder shaped one. And the cylinder shaped one is it's like yin and yang. It's like man and woman. And later it's changed into, in the 15th century, it's changed into a square one to reflect the influence of China on Vietnam. The concept of the earth is square and the sky is round is imported from China. And this is one of the theory. Nowadays, there are people who follow that theory, some who don't. But the colonial, Vietnam was under the French colonies, and then during the war, it's actually never affect the fact that those kind of cake, the cylinder on the square one and the round one, as throughout all of this year, are still make and eaten, and the story was told the same way in the 20th century.
Thank you to our panelists. I believe Jvala also kind of touched on why he was interested in that time period from the 18th and 19th century. So I kind of touched on that question. I actually had a question for Matthew. I know I spoke to the panelists about this, but I know you also did some research in other Asian cultures' adaptations of the vampire. I know growing up, I knew of the Chinese jumping vampire, which was much different than my white friends growing up and their idea of a Eurocentric vampire. And so I was actually wondering if, I know you said you featured that in the film, so I wonder if you could speak on that a bit.
You're going to find it surprising, but I actually knew about the Jiangxi before I knew about the Aswang. Because I was watching so many Hong Kong films like the Mr. Vampire series and all those other things, and I just thought, wow, this is pretty trippy. I mean, I kind of grew up just knowing that, just through just association, just the friends I hung out with. And I wasn't until I actually got back to the Philippines to really dive in to realize that we had our own versions. I was like, wow, amazing. I mean, and that's when I started getting much more into it. But again, I guess that's a callback to having them together in the same movie was, it's like, I think the Jiangxi was really more my entry point into understanding we had our own variant cultures throughout different Asian Pacific islands, and just our own mythologies, and there's just such a wealth of it, and I've started to research a bunch of other things that come from other Asian cultures as well. So it's been really a fun journey to kind of learn about all this.
Awesome, cool. Well, we just have a few minutes left, Julie. I don't know if anyone has any more questions.
Yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question to any of our 5 panelists. I believe there was also a Q&A that for some reason I can't pull up on my side. Can someone else?
I think I was just asking folks to drop their questions in the chat. I'm not seeing anything yet. But I was actually had another. Clinton, were there Q&A questions?
Yeah, there is one Q&A, and it was sent by an anonymous participant, and it's for Matt. Was there a real life event or incident of these vampires?
Ooh, long story short, I don't believe that they really exist, but a lot of people do believe they really exist. So it's a really touchy subject. I know a lot of people ask me, do you believe in this? But like, it's fiction, it's fun. But a lot of historical events have happened. Like I touched on World War II specifically, where there was a lot of rebel fighters, and US was actually utilizing people's fear in these creatures to manipulate people. So there's some actual real incidents that come upon, that actually come true to how people respond to it. Political leaders also utilize people's superstitions to try to manipulate them into voting for them sometimes. So it's real for Filipinos. It's very real out there. And there's a lot of things out there that inspired it. But I will say one thing that visually probably inspired it is having probably the world's largest bats in our country, bigger than any vampire bats. They're like this big, we're talking like a humongous bat, but they're fruit bats and they're very sweet. No pun intended, because they're fruit bats. But they're actually sweet creatures. They're like flying foxes, but we have one of the largest bats in our country. They're huge wingspan. I don't think I would be really afraid if I actually saw one. I probably want to pet it. Not a good idea, but but yeah, there are a lot of things in the real world that actually inspired it, but I don't believe that the actual creature is real. Thank you for that question, by the way.
Yes, and it looks like we're right at our finish point, unless Julia and Jamie, you want to take a couple more or put a bow on it, as they say.
Sure. Again, I just want to thank our wonderful panelists. This was such a rich panel, and such great stories that I had not heard of. I was hearing for the first time. So thank you to our panelists. And I hope everyone enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you all. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Great.